Here are the pros and cons of living in Suwanee, Georgia. No question that one of the best parts about living in Suwanee, Georgia is the school qualities there in Suwanee. Suwanee is part of Gwinnett County, and generally speaking, Gwinnett County is very well known for having some of the best schools in all of Metro Atlanta, maybe even some of the best schools in the country. And Suwanee is no different. Really, so many of the public schools there in Suwanee are very highly rated schools. According to greatschools.org, Riverside Elementary School is a 9 out of 10, Northbrook Middle School is a 9 out of 10, and North Gwinnett High School is also a 9 out of 10. Unlike some of the other cities in Metro Atlanta, it really doesn't matter what part of Suwanee you're living in, you're really going to have a very good public school system associated with where you live. Also, keep in mind that in Georgia, the home address is kind of associated with a specific school. So if the address where you live is associated with North Gwinnett High School, there really isn't room for going to like a different high school. Whatever school district is part of that address or that neighborhood, that is the school that your child or your student would need to go to. And then another big benefit of living in Suwanee, Georgia is the home values in Suwanee. Last year in December, the average home value was about 530,000, and then this year in January and in February, the average sold price in Suwanee, Georgia was about 540,000. So we have really good home values there in Suwanee, especially considering some of the neighboring cities like Johns Creek or Alpharetta, where the average home values are as high as 700,000. Suwanee is certainly a great choice, especially when it comes to average home values. Now, keep in mind that the housing market here in Georgia is certainly starting to pick up. Not only are we seeing the spring activity that we typically see every year, so we're seeing more buyers, which means home prices may be going up here in the next few weeks, but also people are starting to kind of get over the shock of the very high interest rates. You know, last year, 6 months ago, that interest rate of like 6.5% or 7% was like super surprising to so many people. Now we're kind of like, oh yeah, 6.5%. It's better than 7, you know. So now we're kind of getting to a point where interest rates are not as surprising. So buyers are starting to come back to the market. And this means that home values could be going up not only in Suwanee, Georgia, but all across Metro Atlanta. And then another very big benefit of living in Suwanee is the town center area there in Suwanee. They have a beautiful downtown Suwanee area, town center. They have a big green lawn there, big park in the middle of town center in Suwanee. They also have an amphitheater there in the town center part of Suwanee. Lots of shopping, lots of restaurants, super easy to walk around there. And that's something that really a lot of people are looking for in an area where they move. They want to be in an area where they can walk around to the shops and to the restaurants. So if you happen to own a home super close to that town center part of Suwanee, you would certainly be able to walk there and back. Now, of course, if the home that you lived in was not super close to town center, you know, if it wasn't within about a mile of town center, you would certainly need a vehicle. It's not really that kind of city where you can walk to everywhere. You wouldn't be able to walk to like the grocery store or to the post office. It is still a suburban part of Metro Atlanta, so you would need a vehicle for most of the places that you wanted to get to. But there in the town center of Suwanee, you certainly would be able to walk around there to access the shops and the restaurants. Also, I believe City Hall is right there in the middle of town center. So it's a great part of the city. If you're ever in Suwanee visiting, you certainly want to check out town center. Another pro about living in Suwanee, Georgia is the community that you can find there in Suwanee. As you can imagine, we have excellent home values, we have great schools, we have a great downtown area in Suwanee, Georgia. So this means that all of these things combined, the excellent home values and the very good school district, tend to attract a lot of young families who are looking for that kind of lifestyle. So there are lots of young families in Suwanee, Georgia. It's a very family-friendly kind of part of Metro Atlanta to live in. As you can imagine, there are lots of extracurricular activities there in Suwanee: baseball, sports for the kids, or dancing or gymnastics, music. There's all kinds of activities for kids there. And then for young families, there's lots of things to do there as well. It's not the kind of city where you would find, a great nightlife. You're not going to find like, clubs or something like that in Suwanee, Georgia. There's not like a great nightlife there in Suwanee, Georgia. It's really mostly for young families who tend to go to sleep early, like 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock. It's certainly not a city like Atlanta or Midtown. It's a very different feel there in Suwanee, Georgia, much more of a suburban kind of feel. So you're going to find great community there in Suwanee, Georgia, and that's certainly one of the best parts about living in Suwanee, Georgia. Okay, let's talk about the cons of living in Suwanee, Georgia. Now, it's kind of difficult to find some downsides to living in Suwanee. Suwanee is certainly one of my favorite cities. It's a great part of town, but there are a few things that you should know about there in Suwanee, Georgia. So let's talk about the cons of living in Suwanee, Georgia. Certainly one of the downsides of living in Suwanee, like many other cities in Metro Atlanta, is the amount of traffic that we have here in Suwanee, Georgia. Roads like Interstate 85, Buford Highway, Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, all kind of run north and south, a little bit diagonally though, and they run from the city of Suwanee to the city of Atlanta. So what this means is that the people who live in the city of Suwanee and work in the city of Atlanta all tend to be traveling to the city of Atlanta during rush hour. And this is really where the worst parts of the traffic are in Metro Atlanta. It's during the rush hour on the way to the city of Atlanta. And then in the evening time, it's the rush hour on the way back to the suburbs or Suwanee, Georgia. So we have Interstate 85, which tends to get certainly backed up not only during rush hour, but really any part of the day. If there's ever a traffic accident there on Interstate 85, it can certainly get backed up very easily. And then Peachtree Industrial Boulevard tends to get kind of congested during rush hour, and then also Buford Highway. So those are some of the main roads that you're going to find the majority of the traffic on in Buford. But some of the roads that are not those main roads, some of the side roads or the roads that are not highways, don't tend to be as bad. There are a lot of side roads or surface streets, as some people call them, in Suwanee, Georgia, which really allows for a lot of different routes to get here and there. So those roads don't tend to get as bad, but those main roads that we just mentioned are certainly some of the worst when it comes to traffic in Suwanee. And then another downside of living in Suwanee is the limited public transportation. Atlanta has MARTA, which is a very elaborate public transportation system, and it's pretty good. It's not great, but it's okay. Suwanee, however, doesn't really have any kind of public transportation, and this is very common in many of the suburbs all around Metro Atlanta. If you live in Suwanee, you certainly need a vehicle to get around the city or to get to any part of Metro Atlanta. But as far as public transportation goes, it's not really something that you're going to find in the city of Suwanee. Now, while we're talking about getting around to other parts of the city, a very common question that I get is, if I live in the city of Suwanee, do I need to go to other cities to get access to things like a grocery store or for maybe government buildings? Like if I need to go to City Hall or if I need to find different services for things around my home, will I need to go to other cities? And the answer is no. For the most part, a city like Suwanee is all kind of self-contained. You're going to be able to find anything that you need for the most part there in the city of Suwanee, and it's not very common to need to travel to a different city to get access to those things. And that goes for many of the other cities all around Metro Atlanta. Like if you live in Suwanee and you need to pay a traffic ticket or something like that, you don't have to go to Atlanta to do that. You can still do that in Suwanee. Hopefully you don't get a traffic ticket, but maybe if you're on Interstate 85, you might be speeding. Or if you're looking for a lawn service, or if you're looking for, some kind of different service, maybe it's pest control around your home, you don't have to go to another city to find those things. Typically speaking, those things can be found in the city of Suwanee. And then another downside of living in the city of Suwanee is that some of the homes, certainly not all of the homes, but some of them are kind of aged a little bit, more than 20 or 30 years old. It's not uncommon to find a home in Suwanee built in the 70s or 80s, and so sometimes those homes have deferred maintenance, which can certainly be a big problem when you're trying to sell a home. However, if you're trying to buy a home, it can be a really big turnoff. Homes built in the 70s or 80s sometimes have roofs that are 20 or 30 years old, or have HVAC systems that are 20 years old, or maybe it's a hot water heater or any kind of major home system component that is very aged. This is commonly what you find in homes that are built more than 20 or 30 years ago. And you can certainly find these kinds of homes with deferred maintenance in the city of Suwanee. Unfortunately, here in Georgia, with the home values being so much lower than other major cities in the country, for some people, putting the money into replacing those things is not worth it. And, sometimes if your home is already at the top of its market value, sometimes it's not worth putting the extra thousands of dollars into putting a new roof, because you might not be able to recoup that because home values are generally lower here. So unfortunately, we kind of have that dilemma there with property values and with people modernizing their homes. And so it's certainly something to look out for if you're looking for an older home, not only in the city of Suwanee, but really any part of Metro Atlanta. Awesome. If you've made it to this far in the video, I really appreciate it. I have two bonus pros and cons for you. Bonus pro of living in Suwanee, Georgia, is the amount of parks and the green space that they have there in Suwanee. It is really all over the city, and that kind of comes with the fact that it's a very family-friendly city. So because of that, there are parks and there is nature to explore there in Suwanee all over. Not only that, but we also have the Chattahoochee River, which runs along Suwanee, which is a big source of people going out in nature. There's lots of swimming or fishing or kayaking there on the Chattahoochee River. And so there really is no end of finding outdoor activities and nature activities there in Suwanee, Georgia, and certainly one of the highlights of living in that amazing city. And then bonus downside of living in Suwanee, Georgia, is that there really are lots of trees, as you can imagine, because we have so much nature and green space there in Suwanee. That also means that we have lots of very tall pine trees in Suwanee, Georgia, and pine trees are terrible for any home. Unlike an oak tree or a hickory tree, which has a very long lifespan, a pine tree kind of has a shorter lifespan. So this means that during storms or during any kind of wind, sometimes here in Metro Atlanta, it's very common for the pine trees to blow over and cause damage. It's not as common to hear of an oak tree or a hickory tree to fall down in a storm and cause damage. It's usually the pine trees that have that problem. So if you have a pine tree very close to a home, which is very common in Metro Atlanta and in Suwanee, it's strongly advised to have that pine tree removed. Pine trees can cause lots of destruction, and it's very common to find pine trees close to homes in Suwanee. Also, keep in mind that here in Georgia, if the pine tree or any tree really is on your property, you do not have to get a permit from the city to cut down the tree. I've had really quite a few people ask me about that. I think in other parts of the country, you have to get a permit to cut down a tree on your property, but not here in Georgia. In Georgia, if you asked the city for permission to cut down a tree in your yard, they would be very confused. They would just tell you it's your tree. You can do anything you want with it. So you don't have to ask permission. You really can cut it down yourself. You can have a professional cut down the tree. And so again, any pine tree that is within 100 feet of a home, strongly advised to have that pine tree removed. There really are so many great parts about living in Suwanee, Georgia. If you want to know more about what it's like to live in Suwanee, check out this video. I'll see you there.